Welcome back to Mac Music Review, all you weird people. Today we are finally talking about Travis Scott's Utopia. This Utopia album has been the topic of very interesting discussion. I'm really truly fascinated by the critical and popular reception of this album because it's been all over the place. Some critics calling the album a masterpiece and others saying that it is trash. And while I was very underwhelmed with the album on my first listen, I listened to it as a listening party with my brothers. I was just very underwhelmed with my first listen of the album. But 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 a lot of people love this album. Not included in that list of people who love this album, though, however, is Alphonse Pierre from the music review website Pitchfork on staff. He does a lot of rap album reviews. He gave this album a 5.7. That is kind of unbelievably negative. Even as someone like me who's not a massive fan of the album, a 5.7 seems like you are out to get Travis. Like you kind of hate him because I don't think someone legitimately listening to that album from track 1 to track 19 would come away thinking that it was really bad because in his review, he legitimately does not say one single positive thing about Travis Scott and seems like he really just despises him. Instead of what I normally do, and I feel like this is very common for people to just click on reviews just for the sake of seeing a score, just seeing a numerical value, and saying, oh, okay, Pitchfork liked this thing. And I think it's fairly rare for people to actually read reviews all the way through. They don't want to know what Rolling Stone really thought of an album. They just want to know what they rated it. Rolling Stone seems like a kind of an irrelevant example. But I was so perplexed by this score that I went in and read this review, and I need to kind of break this down for you because my findings were quite interesting. I'm just going to read through some quotes and then break them down, explain what they're saying, what's going on here. If it's not already self-explanatory enough, it probably is. This is probably a little bit of a pointless exercise, but let's do it anyway. In the synopsis for this review, Alphonse says, in an attempt to give the world a true blockbuster rap album, the Houston rapper delivers a shiny, empty spectacle loaded with superstars who rarely make an impact. So right off the bat, we're accusing Travis Scott of just making an album that is just very much heavy in style, but not a lot of substance, which kind of, in my opinion, seems like Travis's MO. It kind of always has been style over substance. I would say probably as someone who's not a huge Travis Scott fan, maybe Travis Scott fans would argue otherwise. But the reviewer also claims that the superstars on the album is loaded with superstars, which it is, like a really crazy list of features on this thing. They rarely ever make an impact, so he's putting some of the blame of the album sucking just in the synopsis on, and I say sucking because he thinks it sucks, on the guest artists, on the guest performances. There's a very large, very chunky paragraph in here comparing this album and Travis's music kind of as a whole, and more specifically on this album, but also as a whole, to the entire discography of Kanye West. It's a bit of a strange comparison. I myself made a comparison between Travis Scott and Kanye West when I heard the beat on Circus Maximus, which sounds a lot like Black Skinhead, but apparently Travis Scott had a lot of influence in the Yeezus album making process, so it sort of in a way makes sense that he has some Yeezus sounding stuff on this album. I don't think the majority of the album does sound like Yeezus, but he did make a lot of comparisons to Yeezus, and websites all over the internet are, when this album dropped, were comparing it to Yeezus, which I think is a very kind of an odd comparison. I think it has more in common with Donda in terms of the size, in terms of the scope, in terms of the randomness, in terms of the features, than it does to Yeezus. And once again, in kind of a merger of this whole review, we say the reviewer, Alphonse, writes, but again, at his peak, Kanye was able to draw show-stopping features out of collaborators. These are nothing more than fleeting thrills. This is once again, I believe, a very weird choice of criticism. I mean, I don't fault Travis Scott. I wouldn't fault Travis Scott if the features on the album didn't pull through. I think the features on the album do pull through. It's hard to think of specific examples off the top of the dome, but I really wouldn't blame. I think it's just a weird point of criticism to just really mock the features on an album, even when an album is rich in features, and especially to blame the primary artist who made the album for lackluster features. And that's once again a hypothetical. I don't think that these features are necessarily lackluster. One of the worst points made in this review comes later on after this Kanye West comparison, where Alphonse writes, one of the basic attributes we expect from rappers is to be real with us, or at least convince us that they're not purely BSing. Mild edginess like I got yay over Biden on Schizo or blank mosh pit ready tracks such as Utopia Twins just come off as deflections. It's scared rapping hiding behind the spectacle. What is this point? The issue is that Travis Scott isn't writing some super deep lyrics. I mean, I love, some J. Cole and some really meaningful stuff, some really thoughtful and introspective lyrics. That's the stuff that I gravitate towards, but it doesn't seem like a legitimate criticism when we have to, we're going to stay tuned till the end of the video because I'm going to highlight other reviews by Alphonse. And I don't think he's being very consistent here because Pitchfork and other critics will praise rappers who are saying completely superficial, random, BS, to use the term as he uses in the review. But criticizing Travis for that on this album, when I don't think the album lyrically is much deeper or more shallow than Astroworld, even though they were favorable towards Astroworld, it's just a completely, I'll say, superficial criticism. The review goes on to mock two songs which I have very different opinions on. It mocks Modern Jam, which is my least favorite track on the entire album. I think this song is embarrassingly corny. And the guy in this review, here it is. It says, Modern Jam features some embarrassingly uninspired stripped down rapping by Travis. I think Travis is a little bit awkward on that song. But ooh, the mildly funky beat is co-produced by Guy Manuel de Homem Christo of Daft Punk with an exclamation point. That's so exciting. Meltdown is diet sicko mode, but oh man, and then whatever. I'm going to go ahead and say it. Maybe this is a hot take. Maybe it's a hot take. I like Meltdown more than Sicko Mode. I know it's not nearly as popular as Sicko Mode. Sicko Mode is one of the biggest rap songs of the 2010s, of the last decade. But I think Meltdown is just Drake in absolutely top form. I think it's a banger. I think it's also really funny and memeable, just like Sicko Mode was. I think Meltdown is just a really great song. Possibly my favorite song in this entire album. But absolutely the most hilarious and savage part of this entire review, which I actually really like, that I think it actually nails something, is what Alphonse writes about the song K-pop. So it's not even surprising that K-pop exists. A diabolically stupid plan to create the most popular song in the world. You have Travis, The Weeknd, and Bad Bunny fusing their croons together over a sauceless Afro-pop rhythm on a track where the title supposedly isn't a reference to the Korean pop genre to gain extra clicks, but has the same effect. The algorithms will love it. Congrats on the hit song. Surprised he didn't round out the chart chasing by hitting up Morgan Wallen. That is crazy. That is such a savage remark. Like, dude, like that is so, it's so funny, but it's so on point. I was baffled as to why the song was called K-pop, and him pointing out in this review that it was called K-pop to gain extra clicks because that is like an extremely popular genre of music. That's crazy because I think that's correct. I don't see why else the song would be called K-pop. I also hate this song. I think it's a terrible song. Not my least favorite on the album even. I mean, it's not a terrible song. It's just a very extremely safe and boring song. Modern Jam is embarrassingly bad in my opinion, but K-pop is a pretty bad track, and I kind of love how they just absolutely roast it over the fire, harder than any other song in the album. This guy just hates this song, and I can get behind this hate. And that's Utopia, according to this Pitchfork reviewer who talks a lot about rap music. Now, this guy is somewhat of the resident rap expert on Pitchfork, but when you go through his album reviews, you're like, okay, he absolutely hates Utopia. I was wondering, what is this guy like? And it turns out even some of the biggest rap albums and most noteworthy rap releases in the last couple years, he's been very negative towards. Not as negative as Utopia. In fact, every review and album that I'm going to be talking about now has received a higher score than Utopia by this reviewer, by Alphonse Pierre. Also, cringe name, bro. It's like the most French sounding name ever. But we're gonna go through this man's other reviews now. I think this should be kind of fun, and we're gonna see what he rated the albums, and we're gonna see that they are all higher rated than Utopia. So let's look at 5 or 6 albums that this guy thinks are better than Travis Scott's Utopia. The first album I would like to shout out and review, and by the way, I haven't read these reviews. I'm just looking at the score. That would have taken too long. I suffered enough reading through that Utopia review, that kind of slightly preposterous review. But he gave Let's Start Here by Lil Yachty a 6, only 0.3 points higher than Utopia, but still more positive. This is probably the Alphonse, I don't know how to say this guy's name, review that I agree with most closely. I would probably also give this album a 6. In case you're wondering my thoughts on it, I just don't really care for it. I respect the opinion. I respect that Lil Yachty is trying to do a different thing. I understand that he's not great in his own genre, funny enough. So good for him trying to do something else. And I think Pretty is a banger. But this album is not it for me. And yeah, this is once again the Alphonse take that I would align most closely with, and he thought this album was better than Utopia, which I think is kind of ridiculous, even though I agree with the score. This one made me upset. A 6.6, that averages up. A 6.6 averages up to a 7. He said that the Drake album, honestly, Nevermind, is a 7 out of 10. I have listened to plenty of Drake. I'm not a huge fan, not a diehard fan of any of his albums. I think he's got some good stuff. I even think he has some pretty good or even great albums. This is like the worst thing he's ever done. This album is worse than For All the Dogs. This album is worse than Views. This album is trash. I mean, like, utter trash. Jimmy Cooks is the only redeemable track on this thing. It is a joke of an album, and it deserves Fantano's not good. It doesn't deserve to be listened to in full, because it's a huge waste of your time. And he gave this album a 6.6, nearly an entire point higher than Utopia, and that's an issue. He gave the exact same score to Yeats 2 Alive, an album that I think is already, even though it hasn't been very long since its release, an album that has already kind of solidified itself as a classic of sorts. I personally have no idea what I would rate this album. I think it kind of defies a rating. All I can say for sure, it has some of the best Yeats songs on it, and I would probably give it a higher score than this. I mean, it might be the best Yeat album, honestly. It might be. I know some people probably think that it is in the Yeat fan base. It's, I'm moving on. Yeah, he gave this J. Cole album, the latest J. Cole album, a 6.5, which is a much higher rating than Utopia, but still a pretty negative review. I would not call a 6.5 positive. That seems fairly negative, and I think this album was pretty darn good. It was very different, so maybe, different than J. Cole's other releases, but J. Cole has not been well received by Pitchfork just in general, so I don't really know what to make of this review. It seems pretty in line with the website's standards of J. Cole, but I think the album deserves a little bit better also. I think this is just a tad bit too negative. One of the only really positive reviews I could find by this guy by a more mainstream album, and I would say that all the albums I talked about are a little bit more mainstream or by more well-known artists. He typically trashes things by more well-known artists, but he really liked Eternal Atake by Lil Uzi. I mean, he gave it an 8.4. This album was kind of I remember this review was kind of big. Like, this is probably his most popular review. Like, I just remember seeing this all over Pitchfork, all over the internet. Like, dang, Pitchfork is loving this new Uzi project. It got a lot of people excited for it even. It turned me onto this thing. So this review was, it's probably his most iconic review, if you could say that. I mean, besides this Utopia review, which might go down in the history books for Travis Scott fans. But this really caught my attention. It's a good album. The album is quite good. I don't know if I would give it an 8. I don't love Uzi, but it might be the best Uzi project, or at least one of them. You know, I don't totally disagree with the score. Now, after all this, you may be wondering, what are my thoughts on Utopia? It's time for that part of the video. I personally think Utopia is a massive mixed bag that also happens to be somehow consistently produced and extremely well performed, not just by Travis, but by the features on the album. I think everybody who pulls up on this album, specifically like 21 Savage, the people on Utopia Twins, even though the song is ridiculous, I think Drake is just killing it on this album. I think everybody on the album really showed up and did their thing. SZA on Telekinesis sounds beautiful. I think Travis sounds better than he has on any of his albums. I think his voice, I think he's really worked out that auto-tune, and he's really just mastered the art of this auto-tune crooning. And especially on a song like songs where it's just him on the mic, songs like I Know or Hyena, I think he's just going crazy, and I think he's going so hard in the paint. But so many of these songs just don't do it for me. There's so many songs in this album that I don't care about. I will go ahead and list those off. I do not like the songs, meaning I'm not personally a fan of the songs. Thank God. I really don't like Modern Jam. I like parts of Thank God, but I don't like the song as a whole. I'm not a huge fan of Modern Jam. I think My Eyes is all right. I do not like God's Country. People are really messing with this song, and I'm just not big on it. I don't care about Sirens at all. Delestro Echoes, to me, is kind of boring, even though Beyonce was pretty good on the song, I guess. I think Utopia Twins is well produced and sounds pretty good, even though the lyrics are so preposterous and ridiculous that it's really hard not to laugh at this song. So that's kind of a thing. I think Circus Maximus is just a really bad version of Black Skinhead. I really don't care for it at all. I like parts of Schizo, but not the whole song. I think Love is one of the worst songs on the album. Even Kid Cudi just didn't do much for that track. K-pop is really bad. I do not like this song at all. Telekinesis was quite good. I mean, this song is actually pretty cool. Until Further Notice was pretty good. But this dude, I would say about half the tracks or even more, I'm not really messing with. If I'm vibing with some of these songs, I'm only vibing with parts of them for a lot of these tracks. And that just doesn't feel great to say. There's only about a handful of the tracks on the album that I really come back to and really just enjoy all the way through every time. But I just can't say that about the majority of the album. And that's about it. I know this video was a long one. It's been looming over my shoulder for a very long time. I actually read the review and picked up the snippets from the review literally like a month ago. I mean, not long after the album came out, knowing that I wanted to do somewhat of a deeper dive than I've done in the past, because I do like to look at music reviews and album reviews and kind of question them and point out the flaws of the review, like review the review, sort of. But I never really went super in-depth on that before, and I wanted to go more in-depth in this video and even research the guy's other album reviews. Who knows, maybe one day in the future we'll look at another Alphonse peer review and question it, because I don't know if any of the other ones are as controversial or crazy as this Utopia one. Like this one really just kind of took me off guard and really surprised me. I don't think any of his other reviews are that shocking, but it might be fun to do sometime in the future. Anyway, it was a long video. I appreciate you watching it. Have a great rest of your day.